Hi, welcome to our final week. And this week we are going to study the arrays and handling of the files. So, both of these are important because in your practical scenarios, when you do the coding, then you will encounter with the arrays. Arrays is a list of elements in your code, as you will see probably. So what the main thing here is that, I mean, you can utilize the Visual Basic for creating the application for small business, or I mean, ranging from small business to multinational corporations. Now when you do the programming, it can grow in size, right? And also the role of organizing, storing, retrieving large amount of data becomes very important. So in this particular installment, or in this particular session, we are going to explain some basic features uh, of creating and maintaining the arrays, and then we will talk about how do you handle the files, how do you manipulate the arrays for helping your user interface to work smoothly. So all these things will be covered here. And if you see the lab, I mean, you should watch the video that I have created for the lab, and that will have a much more technical details about the code. Now in this particular lecture, the objectives are, first of all, we will learn how to initialize an array. First of all, we will learn what is an array. We will learn how to initialize an array, then initialize an array with some default values. How do you access the elements of an array using a for loop, using a loop, right? And because, I mean, array has a more than one element in it. Theoretically it can have one, but it should, in principle, it can have one too many elements in it. So you can access each of the element by running a loop over number of elements. So we are going to discuss about that. Then you can use the redim to resize an array. This is a very interesting feature. Then you determine the number of elements in an array using the length command. Use the for each loop. So that's another thing we will discuss. Then we will initialize a two-dimensional arrays. We will read a text file, we will write to a text file, we will calculate some here I say deprecation because this is in accordance with the chapter project, but you can do any possible calculation, any calculation as per your business requirement. So you can use the multiple form objects, and also we will code access the variables objects on another form. Okay. So if you see these, I mean, it's like our chapter project. It's a sample project where we are basically trying to create an application that controls a burger food truck named Chef Shack. And what we are calculating here is the inventory depreciation. So the main purpose of this, the business domain, or the main purpose for behind this form is create some create some calculation in a calculative way to exhibit what is the depreciation values if the business owner uses the truck for in a course of 5 years. So there are two different methods of depreciation: straight line and double declining balance. Look at the lab for more details, but basically this will be our chapter project to illustrate our concepts in this chapter. Then you have here the inventory items, right? I mean, here the select inventory item box, list box, you have this list here. So these are the elements of the list. Like, you have each record in the list should have a should have an item. So each item has a name, like here point of sale registers, then the item number or item code, whatever you call it, then the initial cost, the cost that as a business owner uh, what that person bought it for, and then the quantity, how many items are there with the business. So let's introduce the arrays. What is an array? Array variable is to put in a simple way, it's a variable, of course, that can store more than one value. Each value is called an any element. Now, arrays provide access to data by using a numeric index, or you can also call subscript, to identify each element in the array. So how do you define, let's say in this case we are basically defining these numbers, the Baker reservation as, integer equals 4. There are multiple integers defined here, and then what we do, we need to initialize an array. So basically, to declare an array in a program, you should include an array declaration statement which states that the name of the array, how many items it can store. Sometimes it is called dimension of the array, but not always. There are different terminologies going on. So how many elements are there in the array to be in the safe way. So um, so basically, let's re-illustrate the background. So all the applications that we have been working on so far in this course involved a limited number of variables and data. But when you migrate yourself to a professional programming environment, you will have more complex projects, and related applications will have much larger sets of data which needs that need numerous variables. Now you have learned already that the data type variables can store only one value at a time, right? If you define an integer, it can store only one integer at a time. If you define decimal, it will store only one decimal value at a time. So what is the problem? Problem is that we have not used data types that contain more than one memory location to store more than one value at a time. So if you changed the name, change the variable's value, the previous value was basically gone. It's erased, because a typical variable can store only one variable. So what is the solution if you want to have the multi-value variable? So in that case, you can, what you can do, you can do it two ways, like define 5 different values, you know or you can define a single variable which can have multiple values. An array is such a variable that it has multiple variables in it of the same type, and each value is identified by an index. you know the each value is stored under an index, and under you can call it subscript as well. So here, for example, there is a string names, str names. This is a variable. You see, the way we do it is putting a parenthesis here. That's the indication that it's an array, and then you put it as a string, and then you specify the values. So and also the reservations, let's say, we have different arrays defining here. So you can say that these are the integers. Okay. So when you initialize an array, you can do two parallel arrays. It can store related data in two or more arrays. So you have the names of the customer and name of a reservation. Let's say how many reservation, how many days they are reserving a hotel room, things like that. If we think in that way. So basically this array contains the names, this array contains the reservation quantities. So you can also initialize an array in this way. Like suppose you have another array, the athlete, the str athlete. It has 5 elements, so you define it 0 1 2 3 4 5. So you have football, I mean a lot of values are declared here. So you can you can also initialize an array with default values, you know. So when you define it with a default value, the initialize when you initialize an array but do not assign specific values immediately against each element, then you can assign each element to a default value. So here for example, you have the data type, all numeric data type, and you set everything to 0. And then if you have a string data type, your default value can be null. If you have a boolean data type, you can default it to false. I mean, you could make it true as well, but I'm giving you an example here. So what you do here is after the array has been initialized, specific values can be assigned to each element, replacing the default value for each item. As for example here, if you have an array with some default values, you can basically you can have an input box and you say enter the lowest temperature on January, and then you can put it in this way. You can replace the default value with something. Okay, so the Visual Basic compiler determines if each subscript is within the boundaries set when you initialize an array. So let's say we have your boundary here is 30, right? So you have it, but you are putting 0 to 31. What happens, it overflows the boundary, right? You should have only 30 elements, but you are having here how many, I mean basically 32 elements. So you are crossing the boundary, so you will see an exception. The exception occurs when the loop tries to reference an element with subscript 31. This element does not exist because the array contains 31 elements with upper bound index of 30. So here this is your upper bound index. So if your upper bound index is 31, then your array throws an exception. So you will see this kind of exception, like index was outside the bounds of the array. Okay, so an array can use a constant value to represent its upper bound index. By using a constant, the size of several arrays can be specified very quickly. As you will learn in the next section, we will see that they also can be changed very quickly. So the way you change is to reinitialize an array. Every array in Visual Basic is dynamic, which means that you can resize it during the runtime. Okay, so this type of array is therefore called the dynamic array. And how do you reinitialize it? The redim statement, redim, that assigns a new array size to the specified array variable. You can use the redim statement to change the number of elements in an array. Okay, the code, like you see here, what you do, you have this one, I mean initial number, upper bound is 50. It's a string, array of strings with initial upper bound is 50, line number 51. Then in the later part in the code, you can do line number 53, redeem str employees 65. That means your string str employees string array has an upper bound of 65. Okay, so that's how we can reinitialize. So if you want to preserve the existing data, you can use the keyword preserve. Okay, redeem, preserve, initialize data. I mean, preserve the data. The so what it does, it preserves the data. As you have the 50 values, it will preserve the 50 values, and then you can add more values to it. So the length property of an array, so I mean, array is a it's a class or module within Visual Basic. So what you do, you declare an array, line number 51, then you do the label array size dot text equals the array name str branch offices dot length. So when you do the dot length is a variable inside this particular class, I mean particular object str branch offices. So this is the length, and you will find the length size of the array. So instead of guessing how many elements in the array, instead of putting a vague number, you can always do the count from 0 to the year dot length minus 1. So that way you can basically iterate over different elements of the array. Now next part is, how do you use an array? So what you do here is, you can start a for loop. So here int year salary, there are 10 years yearly salaries. So number of employees 0 to the 0 to basically 9, and then you do yearly salary equals whatever yearly salary you put as an input box. You start the for loop, and then you do the next, so you iterate over the for loop, then you basically get the total, and then you can show the total salary, and as well as I mean total by yearly salary length, I mean per employee salary, kind of average salary. So then you can do the list box is filled with the inventory IDs. I mean, in that case you do this way. We have done it during our project, during our class project. So the for each loop, its syntax is like that: for each control variable name in array name. So here for this one to that one, for each control variable name in array name, so you have to use for each, then you have the lines of code, then you do next. So this type of loop iterates through an array until the array reaches the last element. The control variable name is I mean it will contain each individual element of the array without a subscript as the loop is processed. During the first iteration of the loop, the first element in the array is assigned to the control variable. Now you have the array name, the name of the array that loop cycles through. The array must be initialized first, and then you have the name next. I mean, the next is statement continues the loop to its next iteration. So here is an example. So you have string str famous computer pioneers. You have this one. Then you have for each str pioneer in I mean this is these are the this is the array name. Then you do the adding, and then you do the next. So the scope of arrays, the scope of an array declared within a procedure is local to this procedure, but an array can be declared as a class level variable. Here, for example, line number 15, line number 14, 15, 16, 17. So these are the class level array. So you can pass an array can be passed as an argument to a sub procedure or a function procedure. So you can do like, I mean, this button commission click, let's have some fictitious function. You can pass it and basically an array to it. So what you do here, you, for example, you define it like that, and then you have the change value, this one, and you say here DEC value of commission, then you have a parenthesis. This indicates that we are passing a value. You do the by value, and then you pass this variable here. That's the way you pass the value. Line number 137 reflects it. So you can sort an array by calling a procedure named sort. When the sort procedure is applied to an array, we did it for our code as well. The lowest value is placed in the first in the array with an index of 0, and the next lowest value is placed in the second element, and so on. So largest value is at the very end. That's the highest element of the array. So here you do the sorting. Let us say you have this one. So when you sort it, then you will see that here you have array of strings. So this will be sorted alphabetically in a way that anything starts with A comes in the first, and anything A first, Z last. That is the way you do ascending order uh, for the sorting. You can do the search for an array. So basically you can do the binary search method. It's a search method. It's a very efficient search method. You will learn it later in the data structure algorithm class, but now take it as like you are searching the array name and then particular value. So it will give you the it will give you a positive number or 0. A match was found at the subscript number equal to the int value. If the int value returns a negative number, the match is not found. So let's say we get -1, then there is no match. This value is not found in this array. So you can do it two-dimensional arrays as well. It's very simple. One-dimensional array, you put only one number inside the parentheses. For two-dimensional, you do two numbers. So it's like a matrix, if you think about the math, it's like a matrix. You have the rows, you have the columns. So you see it is row 0 column 0, so int value 0 0, row 0 column 1 0 1, row 0 column 2 0 2, row 0 column 3 0 3. Then you have row 1 column 0 1 0, then you have row 1 column 1 1 1, row 1 column 2 1 2, row 1 column 3 1 3, and so on. Okay, that's how the data is structured. So this is an example of how do you create a two-dimensional array. So basically you run a nested for loop. So you run one for loop inside another for loop. The first one accounts for the column, the last one accounts for the rows. Okay, now comes the file handling. To process data more efficiently, many developers use text files to store and access information to use within an application. So in the Microsoft operating system, the Windows operating system, text files have a .txt extension. The simple text file is called a sequential file. Okay, so what you do here, to open a text file, you need an object available in the system.io called stream reader. So you do like dim object reader as IO stream reader. This is the type of the object. Then you do like if io.file. So basically it's another object inside the IO, and then dot exists. This is a function. Then you put the path to the file name with the full path. We show E drive, but you could show it anything. For example, in our application, I have shown that I put in a location in my computer, and I just copied and pasted that location. So if it is true, if the file exists, then you do the io.file open text. So open text is basically you are reading the file inside the object reader or the stream reader. Then you basically you do object reader dot read line here, line number 35 below. So you that way you read each line at a time. And to determine whether the end of file has been reached, use the pick procedure of the stream reader object. So you say object reader dot pick not equals -1. So if the end of file occurs then the peak becomes -1, and then you then you don't continue it and do the subsequent part of the code. Basically, you need to close. Remember to close the stream reader, because if you don't close, this will the memory will be accumulating and your application will crash at some point because lack of memory. So you open the close code window by clicking the view code button in the solution explorer toolbar. These are the detailed instruction you can do. You can follow all the three steps. So this is in the lab actually. So these are the different logic within the code. If there is no file available, then you should see a message box with the error message. And then writing to a text file is similar to reading. The system IO namespace also includes the stream writer. Before we use stream reader, now we are going to use stream writer. So here is an example. So what you do here is you create the object writer as stream writer, and this is your new file. Then you do whatever it needs to get the new data, and then you do, if the file exists, then you do writer.write line. So you are writing one line at a time. You put the customer name, you do the password, and then you that way it runs, it moves forward. And then for the depreciation, we have calculated, I have shown it that in the code. So depreciation is the decrease in property value and reduction in the balance sheet value of a company asset to reflect its age and prolonged use. The easiest way, and it's the most common method, you do the straight line depreciation. This is calculated by dividing purchase or acquisition price of an asset by the total productive years it can reasonably be expected to benefit the company, which is called the life of the asset. So you divide it by the years, and then this ratio is called the value of depreciation. So first year, suppose you start with $10,000, then you do a 5 years span of that the use. Then in the first year you lose 10,000 by 5, that is 2,000. So your depreciation is 2,000. So at the end of first year, your depreciation becomes 2,000. At the end of second year, it will become 4,000, and so on. So that way you compute the depreciation. The double declining balance depreciation method is like straight line method doubled. So your rate is doubled. So that is reflected here in this line number 130, where you the present year value times 2 divided by the life of items. So basically your depreciation will be faster. So you can use the multiple form objects as well in the project. So you click the project on the menu bar and then click add windows form. In the add menu item dialog box, click the window form and then type form display inventory.vb in the name text box. Then you click the add button to the add new item dialog. We did it in the last week as well. A second form object named form display inventory VB opens in the Visual Basic window. In the properties window, change the text property and whatever way you want to change. And then you should see, this kind of, this will be the sample screen after you create the new form. And you can choose a startup project and you can associate that to the form. We have done it before, and then you can do, whenever you want to show it, you can do the show. And what you can do, you can access the variables on other forms. If you do the public shared, this keyword, if you mentioned, look at it, we are not using any DIM, because DIM is redundant in this case. DIM is an optional variable declaration keyword for Visual Basic. If you have public shared, that means DIM is already implied. Shared means you can share this variable publicly. So that way you can share the variable inside the other form. So that's all about it. Your project design looks like this. You will find it in the book. The use cases are written here, the events are documented here. So so basically we have learned to create Windows application using arrays and data file. So that's all for today's lecture. If you have any question, as usual, send me an email via Canvas, and we can discuss about it at that point. Okay, thank you, have a nice day.